Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're diving deep into, well, a pretty specific market, the global trajectory of dicyclohexyl
Right, DCHP, as it's known.
phthalate.
And our source for this deep dive is basically an excerpt from a market report. It's looking at projections for this stuff all the way up to 2033.
Yeah, so our mission here is to kind of slice into this data, get past just the raw numbers, and figure out what trends, what stories these figures are actually telling us, about the DCHP landscape globally and where it seems to be headed. What can we actually learn?
Absolutely. And let's kick off with the big picture, the global view the source gives us. It says that back in 2021, the whole global market for DCHP, it was valued at about $751.6 million.
Okay, so already pretty substantial, over $750 million. And the report projects that number moving up to $927.6 million by 2025.
hmm And looking even further out, the forecast for 2033 hits $4,412.8 million.
Wow. Okay, so that's over $1.5 billion inside the next decade. Clearly, the report sees some pretty consistent growth here.
It definitely does. The source calculates this growth over the whole period, 2021 to 2033, using the compound annual growth rate, the EGR. It comes out at 5.4%.
Right, CAGR, that's like the average yearly growth
Yeah,
kind of smoothed out, right?
exactly. It just gives us a clear signal that overall the market's definitely trending upwards. Steady climb.
Okay, so we know globally it's growing steadily, over 5% a year average. But, markets aren't just one big block, right? Where's this growth actually happening? Where is it maybe a bit slower? Let's dig into the regional breakdown the source provides. Maybe start in North America.
Sure. North America as a whole, it shows a pace just slightly slower than that global average. It has a projected CAGR of 5.2%.
Okay.
The market there was $253.9 million in 2021. It's expected to get to $309.1 million in 2025, and the forecast puts it at $463.6 million by 2033.
And how does that break down by country within North America?
Well, the U.S. has the biggest piece of the pie, climbing from $188.4 million in 2021 to a projected $333.2 million in 2033. That works out to a CAGR of 4.9%.
Right, so a major market, but growing just a touch under the regional average there. What about Canada and Mexico?
Canada's smaller, market size-wise, just
Yeah.
$28.4 million in 2021, but the report actually flags its growth, calling it a promising CAGR of 6.3%.
Oh, interesting. So faster than the U.S.
Yeah, noticeably faster.
Yeah.
It's projected to reach $61.1 million by 2033. And Mexico shows pretty steady growth too, 5.5% CAGR, going from $37.1 million in 2021 to $69.2 million in 2033.
It really is interesting how even within one continent you see those different speeds. Okay, let's hop across the Atlantic to Europe. What's the picture there?
Europe's overall regional story looks actually quite similar to North America. It also shows that 5.2% CAGR.
Okay.
The market size was $182.8 million in 2021, projected at $222 million for 2025, and then $332.5 million by 2033.
And drilling down into the countries.
It's a bit of a mixed bag, really shows the variation. Germany's a pretty significant market, looking at a solid 5.6% CAGR, expected to reach $65.5 million by 2033, up from $33.8 million. The UK also shows strong momentum, actually a bit higher at 6% CAGR, going from $15.7 million to $31.8 million.
But I guess some others are growing a bit slower.
Yes, exactly. France comes in at 4.6% CAGR. Italy's even lower at 4.3%, and Russia's at 4.2%. So these are definitely below the regional and the global averages. Spain's a bit closer to the average of 4.7%. And even Luxembourg, though it's a smaller market, is projected for a decent 5.5% CAGR.
And didn't the report mention something about the rest of Europe category?
It did, yeah. I've pulled that out specifically. Collectively, those other European markets show what the source calls a healthy 6.6% CAGR. That's actually the highest regional group growth rate we've seen so far.
Wow, okay.
It's growing from $22.5 million to $47.5 million by 2033. So it suggests that while some of the big European economies might be seeing slower DCHP market growth, other parts of the continent are really picking up the pace, according to this data anyway.
Okay, really interesting. Let's shift focus now to a region the source explicitly calls a powerhouse in this market, that's Asia Pacific.
Yeah, and the numbers definitely seem to back that label up. Asia Pacific as a region has a CAGR of 6%. That's noticeably higher than North America or Europe. Right. Its market was valued at $223.5 million in 2021 and is projected to more than double. jumping to $464.4 million by 2033.
So where's all that energy coming from within Asia Pacific?
Well, China is the largest single national market by quite a margin. It's expected to grow from $101.9 million in 2021 to $216.2 million by 2033. That's a strong 6.2% CAGR.
Okay.
Japan's a significant market, too, growing at a steady 5.3%.
But the report specifically singled out India, didn't it?
It absolutely did.
Yeah.
The source highlights India as having the highest CAGR mentioned anywhere in the entire report, a really remarkable 6.9%.
Wow, almost 7%.
Yeah. This market is projected to go from $43.4 million in 2021 to over $100.8 million, specifically by 2033. That kind of growth rate suggests some really significant activity. Elsewhere, South Korea also shows what the source calls strong growth at 5.6%. Australia is projected for 5.8%. And Southeast Asia, as a collective region, also looks promising at 6.1% CAGR.
So Asia Pacific isn't just the biggest regional market, it's also forecast to grow the fastest overall, really driven by giants like China and then a particularly rapid expansion in places like India.
Exactly. That seems to be where the most momentum is, according to this report.
Okay, let's move on then. Latin America, the report gave some specific country data there too, right?
It did, yeah. Brazil leads the region, projected at a 5.5% CAGR. It's growing from $16.6 million in 2021 to $31.7 million by 2020.
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.
$6 million in 2021 to $31.7 million by 2033.
Okay.
Argentina is close behind that, 5.3% CAGR. Colombia also shows a solid 5.4% CAGR.
Are there any sort of slower growth spots noted in Latin America?
Peru is projected a bit lower, 4.5% CAGR, and Chile is at 4.8%.
Yep.
So yeah, similar to what we saw in parts of Europe, some countries there are seeing growth that's a bit below that global average.
Right. And finally, let's look at the Middle East and Africa region. What do the data show for MEA?
This region presents a really stark contrast in the growth rates mentioned. Egypt and Turkey, they show moderate growth, 4.2% and 4.4% CAGR, respectively.
Okay, so still growing, but what about the rest of the Middle East?
Yeah, this is where the report uses that phrase, relatively modest growth. The rest of the Middle East category shows a CAGR of just 1.5%.
1.5%. That's tiny compared to the others.
It really is. The market size projection barely shifts from $9.2 million in 2021 to only $10.6 million by 2033. That is significantly slower than literally every other specific country or region the report details.
Okay, yeah, that contrast is really striking. So let's try and, connect the dots from all these numbers. What are the key takeaways from this deep dive into the source material? I mean, first, the overall picture seems pretty clear. The global DCHP market is projected for steady expansion, right? About 5.4% CGR through 2033.
Right. That consistent global growth is kind of the baseline story. But the really crucial insight, I think, is just how uneven that growth is expected to be geographically.
Yeah, Asia Pacific clearly stands out. The source calls it a powerhouse. It's got that 6% regional CAGR. And within that, India really jumps out with the fastest growth mentioned anywhere, nearly 7%. Plus, you've got China's huge market expanding significantly and strong growth in Southeast Asia, too.
And you also see these other pockets of higher than average growth sprinkled elsewhere, like Canada's promising 6.3%, the UK hitting 6%, and that healthy 6.6% in the rest of Europe group.
Right.
It suggests there are specific regional or maybe national factors pushing things faster in those places, accelerating adoption or demand.
And then there's the flip side. Areas with notably slower growth projections like Italy, Russia, parts of Latin America, all below 5%. And of course, that really significant outlier, the rest of the Middle East, crawling along at just 1.5% AGR. The numbers really paint a picture of a market that's growing overall, but just at vastly different speeds depending on where you happen to look.
And what's driving this whole upward trend, according to the source, is pretty straightforward. Industry's looking for more effective plasticizers and additive compounds.
Okay, and that's the only specific driver the report actually mentions. So DCHP, it's a chemical. It's used as a plasticizer. I mean, you add it to stuff, often plastics, to make them, more flexible, more durable, easier to work with.
Exactly. And additive compounds improve other properties. So the report basically attributes the market's upward trajectory directly to that demand from industries.
The need for more effective versions.
Yeah, and more effective could mean a lot of things, couldn't it? Better performance, maybe meeting new regulations in certain uses, maybe cost efficiency as manufacturing changes. It suggests the industries using DCHP aren't just growing themselves, but they're actively seeking, better inputs, improved materials.
So let's wrap up this deep dive then. The key takeaway from this market report seems to be the DCHP market looks set for steady global growth through 2033, expanding at over 5% a year on average. But, and it's a big but, this growth is really unevenly spread out. Asia Pacific, especially India and China, shows way more momentum than other regions.
hmm While some areas, like parts of the Middle East, are projected to lag quite far behind, the data clearly points to where the action is and where it isn't, at least within this particular chemical market.
So here's a thought to leave you with. Considering this growth in DCHP is happening because industries are looking for, quote, more effective plasticizers and additive compounds, and this is projected right through 2033. What does that really tell you about the future of the industries that actually use these materials? What kinds of products or technologies do you think are seeing such demand that they need these better, more effective additives and are driving this growth, particularly in those fast-growing regions like Asia Pacific? It's a really interesting glimpse, isn't it, into the projected future of manufacturing downstream from this one specific chemical market.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on a really specific corner of the chemical industry, the market for dicyclohexyl phthalate. You probably know it as DCHP.
That's right. And we've been digging into a detailed market analysis report on it. So our mission today really is to pull out the key insights, understand the big forces shaping this market.
And figure out why something that sounds, maybe a bit obscure like DCHP, why it actually matters to you listening.
Exactly. Because looking at these markets, even the seemingly niche ones, it tells you a lot about how global industries work. You see regulation, innovation, it all intersects.
It's like a little window into the bigger picture.
Okay.
Okay, so let's get into it. Where should we start? Maybe with what's driving demand for DCHP in the first place.
Yeah, good place to start. So the analysis makes it pretty clear. The number one driver is its job as a plasticizer.
Okay, plasticizer. Remind us quickly, what does that actually do?
Right, so think of polymers like PVC polyvinyl chloride. Naturally, they can be quite rigid. A plasticizer, it gets added in to make the material more flexible, more durable, stops it from being brittle.
Gotcha. So less likely to crack, more bendy, and that's useful in, well, probably loads of things we see every day.
Oh, absolutely. The report mentions examples like the coating on electrical wires and cables, the sheathing, also coated fabrics, even some types of flooring materials.
Things that definitely need to flex and last.
Precisely. And that connects directly to growth in really big sectors. Think construction, think automotive.
Ah, okay. So as more buildings go up, more cars get made.
Especially in developing economies where that kind of expansion is happening fast. The need for these plasticized materials, and thus for plasticizers like DCHP, just goes up.
Makes sense. But the report mentioned another area too, didn't it? Electronics.
Yes, that's a huge one. The electrical and electronics manufacturing sector. I mean, think about all the devices, the wiring, the infrastructure we rely on now.
So much tech everywhere.
Exactly. And all that needs flexible insulation materials. DCHP gets used there in things like cable sheathing again, and specific flexible PVC compounds for electronics.
And geographically, the report points fingers anywhere specific for that boom.
It does. It specifically calls out regions seeing major growth in tech manufacturing and infrastructure. Places like the Asia-Pacific region and Latin America are highlighted as key demand centers.
Okay, so it's not just about making things flexible. Does DCHP have other specific properties that industries like?
It does. The analysis points to enhanced chemical stability and also, really importantly, exceptional performance when things get hot, high temperature conditions.
Right, so it doesn't break down easily. Where would that be critical?
Well, the report lists demanding applications. Think automotive interiors dashboards get hot in the sun, roofing membranes exposed to weather, also high-performance industrial coatings.
Stuff that really needs to hold up under stress.
Exactly. Durability and resilience, that's what these properties deliver. So, yeah, DCHP is valued for that toughness.
Okay, so on one side we have these strong drivers, construction, automotive, electronics, plus these useful properties. But reading through the analysis, it's definitely not all smooth sailing. There's some serious challenges too, right?
Oh, absolutely. Big ones. Probably the most significant hurdle is the intense regulatory scrutiny, not just DCHP, but phthalates as a whole class of chemicals.
And that's based on concerns about health,
Yeah,
environment.
both. Growing concerns about potential impacts, and as a result, you've got regulatory bodies stepping in.
Like who? Where are we seeing this?
Major markets. The European Union, the United States, others too, they're imposing limitations on use or strongly recommending alternatives, especially for certain types of products.
Which products are getting the most attention?
Primarily things where there's direct human contact or sensitivity, so anything involving children.
This audio was created with podcastle.ai.
Where there's direct human contact or sensitivity, so anything involving children like toys or applications that come into contact with food.
Okay, so that pressure is real.
Mm.
And it's pushing manufacturers towards what? Finding other options.
Exactly. It's a major push towards phthalate-free alternatives, particularly if companies want to sell into those regulated markets or sensitive industries. It kind of forces their hand.
And are there good alternatives? Is that another challenge for DCHT?
Yes, definitely. The rise of alternative plasticizers is a big factor. The market is seeing more options described as safer, sometimes bio-based, or just generally non-phthalate.
Does the report name any specific ones?
It does mention one example, DOTP, that's dioctyl terephthalate. The key thing is that these alternatives can often provide similar function, that flexibility we talked about.
But without the same level of health concerns.
That's the idea. They aim to offer comparable performance, but with a potentially reduced health risk profile compared to traditional phthalates like DCHP.
Which must appeal to companies trying to meet consumer expectations around safety and sustainability.
Absolutely. It aligns much better with those trends. So naturally, DCHP starts to lose ground, particularly in segments where, eco-design or safety regs are really driving decisions.
And the toxicological concerns, specifically about DCHP itself, are they leading to outright bans in some areas?
In effect, yes. It's leading to its exclusion from certain product categories. The report specifically mentions toys, again, medical devices, and those food contact applications we discussed.
So you just can't use it there anymore, or it's becoming impractical.
Pretty much. And that directly shrinks its potential market, right? It limits where DCHP can even be considered, especially for major consumer product categories.
Okay, so we have these significant drivers, but also these really serious challenges and restraints. How is the DCHP market actually adapting? What are the trends emerging from this pressure?
Well, one clear trend is a big focus on research and development, R&D.
What are they researching? How to make DCHP safer?
More like how to move away from it where necessary. Companies are investing quite a bit in developing phthalate-free formulations.
Okay.
And the report mentions something interesting, the development of what they call hybrid plasticizer systems.
Hybrid systems, what does that mean? Mixing things up.
Sort of, yeah. Instead of relying just on DCHP, they might blend different types of plasticizers together. The goal is to try and achieve a similar performance profile. Get that flexibility, the heat resistance that DCHP offers.
But using a combination of substances that overall have a better health and environmental footprint.
Exactly. It's a way the industry is trying to navigate. Meet those stricter compliance demands while still delivering the performance characteristics customers need. It's adaptation in action.
That's quite clever. Okay. What other trends? Is DCHP just disappearing, or is it holding on somewhere?
It's definitely not disappearing entirely. Another key trend is that while it might be losing share in those big consumer markets we talked about,
Like toys and food contact.
right, demand is actually holding up pretty well in certain niche industrial sectors. Specific applications where its unique properties are still really valued.
So back to things like heat resistance.
Precisely. The analysis gives examples like specialty coatings, certain types of industrial hoses, automotive gaskets, things that need that thermal stability or chemical resistance.
Okay, so not the massive volume markets maybe,
Right.
but specialized areas where it's still the best tool for the job, or at least a very effective one.
Exactly. And these applications, even if they're niche, they represent consistent, often profitable business for manufacturers who specialize in them. It's finding its level, you could say.
Interesting. And there was one more trend mentioned, wasn't there? Something about geography.
Yes, and this one is fascinating from a global business strategy perspective. There's a noticeable geographical shift happening.
A shift in what? Where it's used, or where it's made.
Primarily where it's made, as regulations get tighter in places like the EU and the US.
The traditional big markets.
Right. We're seeing a trend where DCHP production facilities are increasingly being set up, or maybe shifting focus to countries where the chemical regulations might be, let's say, more lenient or just different.
Okay. So companies are moving production to manage costs and navigate those regulatory hurdles.
That seems to be the strategy. It helps them manage compliance across their global operations more effectively. By producing it where regulations are less stringent, they can potentially keep costs down.
And still supply it to markets around the world where it's demanded, perhaps outside those highly regulated zones or for those niche industrial uses.
Exactly. It's a way the global supply chain adapts to these varying pressures, balancing regulation here with manufacturing advantages there.
Wow. So when you really dive into this DCHP market, it's surprisingly complex, isn't it? It's this constant push and pull.
It really is a balance between, industrial need for performance and these growing safety and environmental concerns, between regulation pushing one way and innovation trying to find solutions. Opportunity versus risk.
So the big takeaway seems to be that, yes, the challenge health concerns, tougher laws, they're serious. They're fundamentally changing the landscape for DCHP.
Definitely reshaping it. But the analysis suggests it's not dead. Through strategic shifts like that R&D into alternatives or hybrids, and by focusing on those specific industrial niches where its properties shine,
It remains relevant. It still has a place.
it seems so, in select sectors, yes.
And understanding all this, for something like DCHP, it really helps you appreciate how these huge global forces interact, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You've got regulators in Brussels or Washington, chemists in a lab somewhere developing new formulas, factor location decisions being made.
And it all impacts the materials that end up in, well, everything around us, from everyday items potentially to highly specialized industrial goods that keep other industries moving. It's all interconnected.
So thinking about that whole picture, this tension between the world needing high-performance materials, the constant evolution of safety rules, and this almost fluid movement of manufacturing around the globe to cope. What does that really suggest for the future? Not just for DCHP, but for industrial chemicals and global supply chains more broadly. It makes you wonder how these forces will keep shaping the very stuff our modern world is built from.
This audio was created with podcastle.ai.